Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm Alan Singer.
Educator, historian, Dr. Alan Singer, our resident expert on Media Watch. Happy to have you with us. We're doing this the Wednesday before our Monday air, which normally is on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and it pops up on YouTube, sometimes LinkedIn and Facebook. What's today's date? The
28th.
28th of August. And so
Hopefully we'll air since we're running into the Labor Day weekend, but we'll see.
That's right. But we'll put it up on YouTube that weekend.
No matter what, yes.
So folks will have access to it. Yeah, so we're actually doing this week after the Democratic Convention wrapped. And so in order to get into the thrust of our show, wrapping a summary of the Democratic Convention, not really a summary, just not my take and then our other gentleman's take on the back end of that convention last night. I personally, I think the kudos that have been showered on Kamala Harris, Waltz, the Democrats for what a great convention they did, actually fairly well deserved, except for me, they did a total self-inflicted wound at the very end last night, because as far as I was concerned, everything went quite well until the fact that the Palestinian contingent had been discussing with them a chance to discuss what was going on, knowing the ceasefire attempts, et cetera, and being told they might get a spot on the main stage, but by the end of the last day, they still had not been granted that main stage. But unfortunately for them, the Democratic Convention gave the Israeli hostage family prime time exposure to actually tell the country at large how much they'd suffered, what was still going on, what the problem was with the hostages being held. And actually it was powerful, heart-wrenching, and should have been done. But the fact that the Palestinians were not granted an equal prime time ability to talk about the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza and the heart-wrenching stories of young people dying, being killed, and over 40,000 people dead as a result of that horrendous October 7th assault by Hamas. To me, that was a self-inflicted wound that the Democrats gave to themselves needlessly, because equal time would have worked so well, and there were so many people who were asking for the ability to tell their story as well. I know I'm not the only one who's saying that, but you guys have, Alan, your take on, did they screw up? Did they not?
Well, first, I found the convention as a whole uplifting. And my favorite speeches were AOC, the congressional rep from Bronx and Queens, Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn, and Michelle Obama, who was unbelievable. The low point, I thought, was when Senator Schumer came out and did the Chucky Shuffle. And I could have lived without that. And to skip the Chucky Shuffle would have made it possible for Rashid Tlaib, who is a Palestinian woman who is a Democratic congressional rep from Michigan, to represent her story. And I think that was a big mistake. We're not talking about having someone from Palestine come in and presenting the Palestinian side in the Gaza war, talking about a US congressional representative in the Democratic Party, talking about having some sympathy for the people of Gaza who have been victimized in this war. The one thing we could say for Kamala in terms of this issue is, in her speech, she did call for self-determination for the Palestinian people. And I thought that was very important.
And I agree that it was a very uplifting convention. which is the polar opposite of the Republicans, which was more fear and warnings, and just it did not uplift. It warned you of what might happen if Kamala was elected. But yes, it was a missed opportunity. We could have had Tlaib speak, and it would have been perfect. We have an elected official of Palestinian descent telling her own story, not somebody paraphrasing. And that would have been a good moment. In the Republican convention in Milwaukee, the Palestinians protested. They were ignored. They were trying to push them away from the convention. In Chicago, the Democrats, I won't say quite embraced them, but they were allowed to speak. In the protest, there was no attempt to shut down the outside protests. So that was good. But in not having that a moment on stage with a Palestinian, missed the moment. And a number of people, including Representative Summer Lee of Pennsylvania, a Black woman, pointed that out on an interview on CBS News. And I'll just lift a quick quote from what she said there. She basically said, she was talking to Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan, and she said that the DNC missed an opportunity to, quote, create space for people, voices that are marginalized, and because there were nobody speaking for themselves. The Democrats missed an opportunity here. As we discussed before we went on air, this was a political decision, walking on eggshells. They should have just gone ahead and done it. A big missed moment for the Democrats here.
I totally agree with you. And your take, Alan, just valid as my take about Tlaib. So we're all pretty much in agreement that the Democrats missed a golden opportunity. But speaking of speeches, this is for me, having 3 kids of my own, etc. For me, the most riveting and the most heartwarming and inspirational speech was Joe Biden's daughter's tribute to her father. His daughter expressed so much love and admiration for a man who had given so much of his life to public service for the rest of America, but always kept his own personal family uppermost in his heart and mind. That for me was the most riveting, inspirational speech of any speech in that convention. And there were a lot of speeches in that convention that were riveting and uplifting, but her tribute to her dad, what's her name, Ashley Biden? We should have put that down before we came on air. She basically almost brought me to tears with her riveting tribute to her dad.
Isn't she a granddaughter?
I'm not. Maybe a granddaughter. She looked young enough to be granddaughter. Could have been one of his son's kids, but I think she said my dad. So I'm not sure. We might Google that real quick. Ashley Biden's speech. Is she daughter, granddaughter?
She was
first daughter, Ashley Biden. Correct.
Yes, daughter. Yeah, just phenomenal speech. Phenomenal speech. And so, yeah, that warmed, as they used to say, the cockles of my heart. It was so inspiring. But to get back to where we were on the Democrats missing a golden opportunity, there was a lot of media coverage about, is she going to get Kamala Harris going to get a bump out of the convention? Is she still riding the honeymoon wave, et cetera, et cetera? But my thing that all this convention coverage brings to mind is the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, the elephant in the room isn't, does she get a bump? Is he up in the polls or not? This horse race, whatever, is why is the media normalizing this election as if it's a normal presidential election? For the simple reason, to me, this is totally crazy for any media to be covering this as if it's normal. It is not. You have a convicted felon. You have a man who tried to overthrow the government on a coup. You have a man who actually has been convicted of sexual assault. He's been convicted of fraud. The fact that he's even on the ticket for what's supposed to be a party, a political party in this country, is shameful. And the fact that the Republican Party, which I hate to call a party because as far as I'm concerned, for the last 50 years, they've been trying to float under the color of political party when they've been a racist cabal that have been trying to gut the Civil Rights Voting Act of 1965 from the time it was passed to today. And 147 of their members actually voted to not certify Joe Biden's election. They're not a political party. So how the media can start to cover this as a normal election as opposed to the threat to a democratic government is beyond me. That's my take. Now, let's broaden the discussion. Bob, you were talking about Paxson, the Republican state attorney general. He's the guy who led the 16 state attorney generals to try to challenge Joe Biden's executive order. Talk to me about that.
I mean, you're talking about the executive order with the
immigration status of spouses.
Yes, yes, the spouses of citizens who are not spouses who are not citizens themselves could apply for citizenship, but under the existing rules, the standing rules, they would have had to leave the country to apply for readmission. Biden administration figured, well, why should they have to physically move to apply? They're here, they'll still be married to the people they're married to, and their circumstances will be the same. So why should they have to actually exit the country to reapply? Ken Paxton and a group of 16 other state attorney generals sued to maintain the status quo, basically forcing the folks to exit and come back, which is silly, but they do it because obviously here again, it's a function of voter suppression, in my opinion, to keep the people away from the ballots and to suppress freedoms, basically. And Paxton, I don't even want to get into him. He's rising on my list of personal crackpots. But yeah, it's a stupid. It was a waiver that Biden tried to apply, and they're pushing back against it. Sorry, Alan.
So it is particularly nasty. The Biden waiver is a pro-family act. Mm-hmm. We're talking about people who are married to U.S. citizens, who have children who are U.S. citizens, who are working in the United States, who are contributing to the United States, but under the current rule, they would have to abandon their children and their families, abandon supporting their children and families to go back to wherever they were from and wait on
reapply to come back in. Yes. And that executive order basically waived the need to leave the country and be separated from your families. And so the MAGA Republicans, elected officials, 16 state attorney general, decided they would challenge that executive order. So some judge in Texas, that East District judge that they always go to when they want to screw with the American people, because once a federal judge passes it, it applies across the country. So they go to that MAGA judge all the time. And he, of course, put a stay. So now they have to fight the stay, and then they can't get any more applications. They have to suspend taking applications. They can't process any application until this gets broken. So basically, it's part of the elected Republican officials trying to stymie individual rights, abilities for practicing democratic principles, staying connected to your family. Those same MAGA people in Texas, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, you dug up the story about the gigantic raids that the state of Texas launched against Hispanic voters. Tell us about Ken Paxton and his other hat of voter suppression. That story is big because it's got a historical precedent.
Well, first, I think instead of calling them MAGA judges, we should call them maggot judges.
I agree.
Maggot officials. because what they did in Texas is straight out of the book. This is like the Ku Klux Klan kind of activity. What they did was, there's a group called the League of United Latin American Citizens based in San Antonio, Texas, and they are trying to get people registered to vote and turn out the vote. And without any justification, without any legal credence, the state of Texas invaded their offices under the order of
In Paxson. Mhm.
and in a straight act of intimidation, they claimed that they were going in to ensure election integrity, that it's election integrity investigation, but there was no evidence that these people did anything other than work to turn out legitimate voters.
Yeah.
And to register legitimate voters. There was no evidence of any fraud. This was done to intimidate people, to make them afraid to vote in Texas.
Republican
And LULAC is a long-standing organization, highly respected organization nationwide. This is not a fly-by-night organization. This is, they've been defending civil rights for a long, long time. And to go into their offices and just like that, this is beyond egregious. Sorry, Eric.
So no, Alan, I just want you to follow up, because that's now resulted in the number of suits being filed, correct, Alan? What does the article say about how many, somebody's calling for a state investigation of that raid, somebody's calling for a federal investigation with the DOJ of voter intimidation tactics? What's the article say?
Well, the League of Women Voters is very concerned in Alabama and in Georgia, in Arizona, in Florida, that these tactics will be used in those states as well.
Yeah, but these are Republican elected officials that are under the guise of supposed legal actions are using voter intimidation, voter suppression tactics. So who's filing the suit with the DOJ?
Well, that I'm not sure.
No.
What's happened is what Texas and other Republicans are doing is they're building on Trump's claim that the 2020 election was stolen because of fraud.
Yeah, I know that. I know.
But the
pushback is legal recourse.
Yes.
And LULAC and somebody else is calling for Texas State Assembly legislative investigation of the raid. And somebody else, maybe LULAC or one of the other voter
ACLU,
of filing the federal government with DOJ.
Yeah, no, the ACLU, NAACP, and League of Women Voters are all involved in pushback.
All right. So now this again, the reason why I'm saying we're going to just stay on this, because these are Republicans in office trying to use the power of their office for voter suppression and voter intimidation. Now, I remember in '88, and I looked it up recently, and it said that in the Kane gubernatorial election, where Thomas Kane won by 1,800 votes or whatever, the Jersey Republicans, in their guise of protecting the vote, showed up with armed individuals, straight out, upright KKK voter intimidation to suppress the Democratic vote in that gubernatorial election in 1988. Democrats filed suit. As a result, the federal government hit the Republican Party in Jersey with a consent decree. They had to cease and desist those tactics for a gazillion number of years. From 1988, and I believe we were covering it on Media Watch a couple years ago for the 2020 election, because the Supreme Court gutted that consent decree before the 2020 election, and they were going back to doing that same goddamn voter intimidation, armed people showing up at the polls playbook all over again. And so the Republicans, as far as I'm concerned, have not been a bona fide democratically run, and I small d, not Democratic Party, upholding the principles of free and fair elections since the mid 80s. They have gone down that rabbit hole. Look, wasn't it 80 something when Lee Atwater came up with the Willie Horton racist ad to get George H.W. Bush elected? The worst, racist, most political, and that became the norm for the Republican Party from that day on.
And for those who don't know it, it was an ad with the image of a darkened black man, a convicted felon, and a revolving door outside of a prison. And it basically told America that this is what you can expect if you don't vote for our candidate. Revolving door
The
prisons.
candidate was George H.W. Bush.
Yes, yes. And you know, you were talking about the decline of the Republican Party. Of course, I didn't like the Reagan administration. I could stomach George H.W. Bush a little bit more, but not by much. And then his son, when he was president, the Republican Party slid a little bit more. But under Trump, it collapsed. I mean, so I've seen to me, the Trump administration really carved the bottom out of the party. Beyond even what, you know,
you're being generous, because what I'm saying is from Lee Atwater's time on,
yes,
they were dog whistling, but every election, big dog whistle. So Donald Trump just looked at that and said, oh, I don't have to dog whistle. I can use a bullhorn.
Exactly.
Basically, he was just saying, I'm telling the people what you want me to tell them without your dog whistle. So he didn't carve the bottom out of that. He just bulldozed it with his bullhorn to say, this is who we are, folks. A racist, non-democratic, don't care about free and fair elections kind of party. And we'll use every trick in the book to be elected. And that's what the media is not reporting. And that's why I'm saying that's the elephant in the room.
Right.
We have the example. Go ahead, Al.
When Biden was still running, they never hesitated to focus on his issues, his inability to focus, that maybe he was no longer able to be president. If you can tolerate listening to a Trump speech or a press conference, Trump meanders all over the place. He cannot complete a sentence. He starts on one topic and jumps to another. He is diminished, and he is not capable of being president. And they don't want to call that out. They don't want to say, this man, whatever you thought of him before, is not able to be president of the United States.
Well, the only person that came out and said that was the young lady, the former, press person, Grisham, Stephanie Grisham. She spoke at the Democratic convention.
Yeah.
She's the one who talked about the fact that he calls his supporters closet something or other, basement dwellers or whatever. I don't know. I forget what the quote was. But the bottom line was, she came out in public, said that man's not fit to be president. Well, Alan, was it you who said 260 whatever? Talk to me about that number. Some people understand. We're talking about the Republican Party. Yeah. Donald Trump is just a figurehead for how bad that party is. Go ahead.
250 minor Republican administration officials from Reagan, from Bush, and from the McCain campaign, have all Romney people have signed a letter saying Donald Trump should not be president of the United States. But what I find disturbing is that there are over 250 Republicans in the House and Senate. Not one of them signed. They are protecting their butts from him, and they will bring the United States to disaster. There is no Republican running for office in the United States who deserves your vote, because not one of them has questioned the competency of Donald Trump.
And Eric, as you mentioned, there's a problem of how the press covers Trump. I mean, we deal with him as if he's just another candidate, just another, and obviously the press shouldn't be doing that at this point, based on his actions, not based on any personal opinions. But let me just, before we have about 3 minutes, I just wanted to slip in what former the Wall Street Journal tech columnist Walt Mossberg said about how the major media is covering Trump. And he's talking about the New York Times, Walter Mossberg in Threads. Journalists have one core job: to tell the truth, especially when it's clear. The staff of the New York Times has done it in the past, even at great risk. Why don't they do it now? If they're being ordered to normalize an autocratic, lying, convicted felon and sexual abuser, why don't they stage a walkout? I want to end it there since we're running out of time. But yeah, why is the media still normalizing this guy at this stage in the elections? And yes, this is a deadly, deadly, deadly important election.
I actually, he's right about that, but he shouldn't just call out the New York Times. Every major outlet, whether it's MSNBC or whomever. I remember Lawrence O'Donnell called out MSNBC a couple of weeks ago when they all ran and gave the Orange Julius guy, T-Rump, all this time for a so-called pseudo press conference. And O'Donnell was livid because he said that wasn't even a real press conference. Why would you go over there and give that man an hour of your airtime for him to rant and rave and tell a bunch of crappy, same old lies that he tells all the time? And he was livid that his people did it. He called out the rest of the media. And so your guy from the Wall Street Journal, the quote you just made,
yes,
he should be calling out the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. And, for me, we got a ton of newspapers around the country that people actually read, not just Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times. Those editorial boards of those papers should not be normalizing this, just like none of the big press should be normalizing this. If the guy's a crook, say it's a crook. The guy who tried to foment a coup to stay in power, the fact that a crooked party would put a crook, a non-legitimate party would put a crook at the top of their ticket. You need to report it as that being the case. A non-legitimate party where 147 of them in Congress, on whichever side of the congressional spectrum they sat, voted not to certify the votes of the American people because they wanted to keep a crook in power. That's a non-legitimate party. They should be reporting it that way.
Yes, and we're about there.
Okay, folks, I got upset, but we have to call it like we see it. It's not normal. It shouldn't be normalized. And this has been Media Watch. I'm Eric Tait.
I'm Alan Singer.
I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube on Media Watch EVT.
And stay safe, folks. We'll catch you the next time.